The Divinity series is a wide-spanning, chaotic universe of myth, legend, retcon, and excitement. With the announcement of the newest entry in the series, Divinity, during the Video Game Awards, we finally get a taste of what Larian Studios' next big step is after the success of Baldur's Gate 3. But what does it all mean? Why did I watch a trailer of a pig vomiting on another pig while a man was burned at the stake? How much ale is too much ale at the local stake burning festival? Well, in this video today, I want to help crack open the mystique of that trailer. If this is your first time on my channel, the way I do things is by upfronting the knowledge of my videos. Now, this is going to be a little difficult because this is a dense subject, and even the entire contents of this video are going to act as a flyby of an otherwise much longer subject or form video. Essentially, the Divinity series has been around for over 20 years, with the first game coming out in 2002, and across all the entries, the lore has jumped all over the place. The series genres have gone from hack and slash to CRPG. The universe is just pure chaos, explained away by fans as an unreliable narrator and what have you. The newly announced Divinity title will take place after of Divinity Original Sin 1 and 2, and will act as a new staging point to canonize a concrete path forward for the game's universe, using all the tools that Larian has at its disposal now. After the raging success of Baldur's Gate 3, Larian can now use the considerable resources at hand to rebuild the universe. This is something that Sven, the CEO of Larian, has commented as being a project that they now have the ability to finally do right. The game will be a CRPG like Baldur's Gate 3 and the two original Sin games, and will also act, like I said, as a fresh starting point. Larian has said that the characters from both games might make appearances, and you will not have to have played either to jump into Divinity running, as the game's core goal, it seems, is to introduce people to the series for the first time, or repave bumpy roads for those that are familiar with it. As far as confirmed announcements, the game is 2 years into its development with full voiceover recording currently going on. It will also be larger than Baldur's Gate 3 with a hopeful less than 6-year development time, which is what Baldur's Gate 3 was. The company is much larger now, so hopefully we're looking at 2 or 3 more years from now with a brand new engine and a new rule set. Both of those are coming with this game. But that's too long to watch this entire video. I'm going to go into a brief history of the Divinity series, break down the trailer bit by bit, then go over what Larian has said in press releases and what have you and other posts here and there. But if that's all you want to know, please feel free to shut the video down. I want to be respectful of your time. You can jump ahead to any part of the video that interests you the most using the chapters notes, the timeline, and the description. If you are heading out though, and you found the information in this video helpful, please don't forget to like, comment, or subscribe. Each one of those things just helps me out in such a huge way. You can also find a link to my Twitch below, where I stream every Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday. Well, let's get started on why Divinity is so hard to explain. So to get us started, we got to go back in time. And, you know, this series has just been reinvented tons and tons of times. And I think that this is Sven's chance to kind of say, okay, now we're going to make this all make sense. Sven's been with the company from the start. He's been the CEO of the company from the start and has been the director in every major Divinity game. And it's worth noting, too, that there are a lot of influences from the things that Sven dearly loved in his, I guess, gaming past. And we're not going to talk too much about those influences because I don't really know every single one of them. I have to really drill down into it. But Sven has said that the Ultima series is one of his favorite series and a big influence as to why he got into the video game industry as a whole. So take, for example, too, one of the biggest things or tenets of the Divinity series is the number of races in the game, 7 or 8 potentially, if depending on how you look at the Eternals. Well, in the Ultima series, really everything in the Ultima series is about the virtues, and there's 8 of them. So you can already kind of see a correlation between these two things, and that's kind of stuff that goes on to be a little bit a part of the lore and the perception thus of, and the importance of certain characters and what have you. So if you're a big Ultima fan, the Divinity lore kind of sits near and dear for you. Now, if you're like me and you picked up the very first Divinity game called Divine Divinity in 2002, you really kind of know you've been here for the long war. You know, you've been along the whole entire ride. And in 2002, when Divine Divinity released, it had very heavy Diablo influences. In fact, at this time, a majority of games really tried to capture that isometric ARPG hack and slash style of Diablo. There's so many Diablo clones in this era. 2002 to 2005 was just kind of riddled with them, really, honestly. And this is where we start to get introductions to the core ideas, the tenets of the Divinity universe. The divine, the black ring, chaos versus order, the 7 races. We all start to get a bit of a taste of the deeper lore that is going to come our way in the future entries. And a lot of the lore here for Divine Divinity it's very simplistic. It's kind of said to you in almost like a folklorish type of fashion. And divinity at this point in the story is kind of the way you would imagine the word divinity to feel. Heroic, aspirational, what you'd aspire to be, hence the word aspirational, but it changes very much as we progress through this whole entire wild, I guess, story. And what's important here with Divine Divinity is that divinity is something you rise into versus something that is inflicted upon you, which becomes kind of the siren song of the later portions of this. So what's important to know too is this is a smaller studio at this point. And as we go through this series, we're going to see the studio get bigger and bigger. So in 2004, we get Beyond Divinity. And this is when stuff kind of starts to get a little weird, right? We get more of a branching of the story of the narrative with like kind of a hero or a bit of like a fallen paladin style of character, like a dual protagonist, as it were. And we start to get divinity feeling less like this heroic, glorious thing and more of a burden, more of an actual responsibility, and less of this, I've made it type of situation. And this is, I feel, where Larian's starting to stretch its chops, as it were, or exercising its chops and giving us a little bit of a feel of things. Because in the very beginning in the Divinity series, we get the divine, we get an introduction to Lucian, who is, I'm not going to go into all the nuance of this, but just know that Lucian is a human that becomes divine, and that's the most base way of saying it. And divine being a god, and the gods derive their power from the source, and being able to tap into the source means you are a sorcerer. That is on the side of quote unquote order. Now on the other side of things is chaos. I mentioned the black ring earlier, right? Well, Lucian's adoptive son, Damien, goes to join the black ring, and there's a whole war with order and chaos. Again, I'm just trying to give you a very quick little primer on those things. Those are kind of a lot of the big narrative punching points of the conflicts that happen between chaos and order. And in Beyond Divinity, we play a lot more with that. But then we step a little bit further and we start to get into a bit of a transition. So we jump into Divinity 2 in Ego Draconis and Flames of Vengeance. So now we have a genre shift. The previous 2 games were hack and slash. It was ARPG. It was a Diablo clone. Now it's a third-person action game. And this is actually kind of indicative of the video game industry at the time. You're coming into the early millennium, and in the early millennium, you have this big console war that's emergent with like Xbox 360 and what have you. And part of this is the end of the golden age of the CRPG. Gone are the era of the Baldur's Gates, of the Fallouts, of all that goodness. And we come into a console era where RPGs have become this third-person adventure style of game. And this is, it's kind of a dark age for RPGs. And I think that this is also Larian's way of trying to stay in the, I don't want to say like in public eye, because that sounds stupid, but I mean like to stay at the forefront of where gaming was going at the time. This is the advent of big steps into, say, Morrowind, into the most massive, into one of the biggest jumps into Oblivion, and then further, of course, down the road into 2011, we get Skyrim. But that's the direction that a lot of RPGs were taken, trying to push into this 3D RPG, third-person action adventure style. And you went from someone trying to play with divinity and everything of that sort to becoming a dragon knight. Now, dragons up to this point in the series are mythological. I would draw a parallel here between the Elder Scrolls series and the Divinity series in their portrayal of dragons up until certain points in their games. Divinity 2, dragons go from being mythological things of the past to now current things that are a central pillar of the universe and are way more grounded. And this retcons a lot of things that were established in the previous 2 games. This is very similar to Skyrim, right? Skyrim from Elder Scrolls goes from dragons are in the past to now the dragons have returned. It doesn't retcon anything, right? The dragons are here. And in Skyrim, you play a dragonborn. Well, in Divinity 2 Ego Draconis, you play a dragon knight. And dragon knights are basically, to again distill this down to the easiest layman's way of describing it, an individual who has been chosen by a dragon to kind of be their I want to use the term human ambassador, and it's not necessarily correct, but they can become so bound to their dragon representative that not representative, but dragon representee, I guess, that they can eventually turn into dragons. It's a pretty cool system that they've derived in Divinity, and I'm curious to see if we get any telling of dragon knights and that greater lore in the Divinity games, because they kind of start to fall off after these 2 major games. And then we jump into Dragon Commander. This is another big shift away, because we went from hack and slash in the beginning to a third-person action game in the Divinity 2 Ego Draconis and Flames of Vengeance series, into now Dragon Commander, which is a hybrid RTS RPG political sim. And you play as an Emperor Dragon hybrid, which is just fucking left field, right? So it's less of like, hey, here's a set RPG narrative you're going to go through. It's more, here's a telling of the times, and you can kind of get an idea of what you can go through. And it kind of starts to introduce that the Divinity series is a darker series than it's originally led itself onto in the beginning. In the beginning, it's very high fantasy, elves, Middle Earth, so on and so forth. There's 7 races, wizards, lizards, orcs, humans, dwarves, everything. But in Dragon Commander, we start to kind of feel like, ooh, this history might actually be propaganda. If I'm going to draw another parallel here, for those of us that are Warhammer 40,000 fans, we know that any army book you read, any codex that you read in Warhammer 40,000 is a propaganda book. It's written from the book of the perspective of the writer, which is to say that you're reading this book about this race, if you want to think about it in Divinity terms, but of this individually faction, and this faction's the best faction. There's never been a better faction than this faction. It's just this faction. It's kind of the way that Dragon Commander starts to portray the history, that history in Divinity is rather propaganda. And then we get a shift once again into the Divinity Original Sin 1 and 2 games. And this brings us full circle to where we are. And the kind of the storyline, or I'm sorry, the timeline here is pretty much a game comes out every 2 years for the first 2, 2002, 2004. And then when we get into the Divinity 2 Ego Draconis, and then Divinity Dragon Commander, it's every 2 years, 2009, 2011, 2013. And we come into Divinity Original Sin 1 and 2, which come out in 2014 and 2017 respectively. We move away from a lot of the established lore, from a lot of the established tonality and mechanics of almost every single game, to go into a turn-based CRPG. And I would argue that Divinity Original Sin 1, before we even get into the second one, really kind of revolutionizes the CRPG system. It becomes far more challenging. It becomes really brutal. Games that are also kind of around at that time that I think are really easy to pull parallels to are games like Pillars of Eternity, which comes out about a year after Divinity Original Sin 1, also borrowing from that very punishing style of CRPG playstyle, which is a little bit different than Baldur's Gate 1 and 2, which is where that CRPG DNA kind of comes from between Baldur's Gate 1 and 2, Fallout 1 and 2, Torment. All those games have that strong DNA. And Divinity Original Sin, we get into something where we talk more about the source, where the source is central to everything. We get more of a definition behind it. The gods are very active, especially in the second one. I guess I'm trying not to be as spoilerish about it as I can. And we see that the gods are less divine and more, I guess more like the Greek pantheon, with a lot more trickery up their sleeve, a lot more going on. Like, let's manipulate, let's be cruel, let's be a part of the human conversation. If you look at the Greek myths, right? But in Divinity, you've got so many different, you've got 7 gods, 7 races. And one of the biggest things that's important to know about this is that this fleshes out the notion that divinity is an infliction. It is not something you aspire to be. If you become divine, it's through sacrifice. It's not through, I have completed these Herculean tasks and now I am ascended thusly to godhood. So with Divinity Original Sin, we get a more grounded approach to the lore that tries to re-centralize it, but does still suffer from the barbs and arrows of its past. But it does also have a bit of a cartoonish and fun feel to it, which I think is really important, because what we're going to talk about with the trailer is such a contrast to that. And we get such a different contradiction too, with the origins of the source, the 7 gods, Lucien's divinity, and his maybe death, maybe how he progresses through the story. All those things kind of are all over the place because there's no set canonical approach to all of it. Even the timeline itself has a big conflict between the dragon era of the games and the original Sin games. You have dragons going from a myth to a dominant force to near extinction to a symbolic relic. You know, it's all over the place. So fans have kind of reconciled this in a number of different ways. You know, they've said, you know, it's gods rewriting history, or it's an unreliable narrator, it's a cycle of creation and destruction, a number of things. So really it doesn't come down to the fact that the Divinity lore is broken. Nay, it's fragmented. It's been just strewn across so many different games, across so many different writers, so many different things as it pertains to game development. You're talking about 20 years of people coming and going from a development house, and their ideas and everything are going to go with that. Sven is probably, I'd say, one of the things that's most consistent about all these things. He's been game director for most of them, so he knows this lore through and throughout. So it'll be interesting to see how he brings and threads all this together, because it's going to unify the genre identity crisis and bring it back into a CRPG, stay with it, and he'll be able to set a new tone, appeal to a new audience, all sorts of things. So let's now jump into that trailer. Now it is finally trailer time. So we're going to do this kind of low tech. I'm going to be using YouTube. We're going to pop around this trailer. And as we move forward here, we have to talk about an assumption we're going to make, because there are a number of different endings for Divinity Original Sin 2. And what I'm going to assume is the canonical ending for what this is going to play off of is that all of the gods are dead. You can kill them in Divinity Original Sin. Spoiler alert, I'm sorry, but the game's like a million years old at this point. And the opening for this too, like the post on Twitter and Facebook on Facebook on their socials, is that the gods are gone, right? That their gods are gone, Rivellon bleeds, and a new power stirs. Those are the 3 big things. And I think those are our biggest clues to knowing A, the state of the game, B, knowing that this is set after the second Divinity Original Sin, and C, what the kind of result of this trailer is. So let's kind of bring this forward. And it opens up with this character. So this is the character that a lot of people have asked, is this Lucien? And, you know, you can really get into that character of who Lucien is, and there's a whole bunch of lore attached to him, but let me just kind of give you the drive-by on this, so we did a little bit earlier. Remember, Lucien is one of the very first characters, one of the very first big characters that becomes divine, and he gets an adopted son named Damien, and Damien leads that the Black Ring and kind of gets allied with the demons. Again, very, very, like, over the very, very, very flyby level of breakdown of that, but Lucien is a very big character. And the big thing that's been kicked around a lot on the internet is that this is either Lucien or Damien. And I don't actually agree with that, because I think if this was Lucien or Damien, this would be a larger festival. Because if we're sacrificing here, and remember, divinity and sacrifice are supposed to be played hand in hand in this universe. One doth not become divine by simply being born divine. It is through a sacrifice, and being in the source and coming in through source into divinity is not like a pleasurable experience, like, aha, I have ascended. That is something that we've seen has changed a lot in the lore that we talked about just a little bit ago. Now, we do have this crown. We do have this thing coming across. I've heard this kind of being called out as a reference to the source collars used by Brachus Rex. I don't know if it's necessarily that, because it's not necessarily a collar, but that is, I think, a pretty cool call out. And we also have this little guy on his chest here. Oh God, he's looking right at me. This star, right? Which is a reference to the order, the church, that is pretty much in charge of everything. And one thing I do want to point out is, it's not that he's not in distress, that he's definitely like, he's not necessarily like pulling at these chains and freaking out in the sense of like, why am I here? Who put me here? There seems to be some sort of knowing what's going on, you know? So let's step this forward. We come into a festival. A wild festival at that. And we get some races. This is important to know. If you do not know the history of this, an elf, and I'm going to talk about that in a second. I'm waiting till I find another race. If you don't know the lore of this, there are 7 races in Divinity. Humans, dwarves, elves, lizards, orcs, imps, and like that kind of has its own thing, and then wizards. Now, each one of them is allied to a specific god, or formerly a specific god. And at one point, there was an 8th, quote unquote, race, an 8th god in the Chaos Lord, who ascended to godhood to fight the God King, which was one of the first divines. That's like 20,000 years ago. Again, that's a very quick top-down view of the lore, but it's just to kind of give you context on why seeing these races is so important. But we have 3 figures here. And these figures are effigies, and these effigies are clearly Wickermen. Wickermen are used in a lot of older pagan rituals, burned sacrifices, and everything of the sort, usually to appease some sort of druidic, not festival, but some sort of druidic, appease a god through druid and paganism. It was shut down by the Romans. And you can see these 3 figures, and we'll kind of go into this in a little bit when we talk about a logo in a second here, but these 3 figures, I think, are 3 specific figures that either are a bit of an Easter egg to an older lore reference to a previous game of Larian's, or these are references to particular figures of the Divinity's actual lore. I've heard some people say that this is Fane's face from Divinity Original Sin 2, which is like a precursor race. He's an Eternal. And we see orcs. So why I've now reserved this time to talk about this is that orcs are in a very specific point in the history of Rivellon. And in Divinity Original Sin 1, orcs are at opposition with humans. They're in the middle of a war. So to see them having good merrymaking shows us that this either predates them or it's way after. And obviously makes sense. The gods are dead if we're going with the assumption that that's the canonical ending. So this is after Divinity Original Sin 2. So I think this is a big context clue to let us know the state of the respective races. Because also, I think we'll see them in just a little bit. We see dwarfs and we see elves. We see Asterion, no less. Elves are kind of scattered to the wind, at least after Lucian destroys their forest with a big old death fog plague. So this shows me, though, that they're in a little bit more abundance here. They're a little bit more, at the time of Divinity Original Sin 1 and 2, they're far more tribal. And this shows more prevalence of them possibly being a larger part of the, I don't want to say lore, but a larger part of the society now. Also, oh, a great shot. We see something in the background. You can just barely see it, and we'll get a better shot earlier. But there are lizardmen back here. And obviously, you've seen plenty of humans at this point. But you'll see like these tall-necked guys right there. Those are lizards. We'll get a better shot of them later. And this dude, who is just like a reoccurring character. Now, you have a clear shot of these tabards in 2 different colors. You've got this hole right here, this crater right here, and this one's the one to take a look at, because this one will come back around later in the trailer. These tabards look like inverted colorage of the order, and I think that is particularly important. I don't quite know though how. It feels like it's supposed to be a kind of some sort of call out to the divine order, which is the church that is basically putting this ceremony on. And again, inverted coloring, or this is actually not really inverted, but it shows, well, no, kind of. But still, my point is that this could be referenced maybe to the Black Ring, and demons and evil stuff, and this could be a reference to maybe this is Damien, this is Lucian, and this is someone else. So there's definitely some sort of connotations here. And then we see the very first peakage of the divine order, the church that's kind of really pulling the strings and orchestrating and telling people how all of the interplay that happens between the source and the gods and everything is going on. And I would imagine that there is going to be a bit of, if you kind of think of the Middle Ages and how Catholicism and the church played a very heavy hand in controlling society during those Middle Ages. And really, they were part of the political power play of this time. If you were a quote unquote pagan Viking and you were a ruler and you wanted to consolidate power against your peers, you just went and converted to Catholicism, and then you could basically be backed by the church and take over your rival's lands. So I'm assuming here that we're kind of in the middle of like a dark ages for the Divinity universe. The gods are silent, Rivellon bleeds, a new power stirs. So is this something that's orchestrated by the divine? But I think by the time we see the end of this, they don't look like they knew it was coming. And we get a little bit more of the ritual here. An interesting thing too, just a little bit, is if we look at his tabard, you can kind of barely see this as we edge, oops, a little bit. This is more representative of the right effigy versus this figure has more of like the left effigy style of order with the white tabard forward. I don't see any symbols on here, but still, like this guy right here. And we see this little girl putting this little tiny totem on this. Now, there are different totems here, and they look to be different characters, different, maybe they're representative of specific gods. Like that was a human, so maybe this is Rollick, which is the human god. This has got like more of an impish look, but more of a lizard look at the same time. So maybe this is Zoral Satissa, the lizardman god, or Zon Teza, the imp god. You know, we don't really, maybe this is the wizard god, who knows? Maybe this is a reference to this. Maybe these are small prayers. And we get the very first reference of some sort of like, this is almost like making the sign of the cross, right? But a 5 and then a 2, reference to possibly the 7 gods, right? I don't see how it could be referenced to anything else. Remember when I said tabard? It's clearly not a tabard. It's clearly metal, and I am not a smart YouTuber. What a great video I've made here, right? But we see these guys, it's kind of announcing the ritual has begun, the eclipse is starting, and this is going to get us into a conversation soon about the Void Woken. But again, I think that if this were actually Lucian or Damien, these two characters that are a huge part of not just like the lore, but the current like time of everything. If we're going to burn someone in a wicker man as a tribute to the gods and hopefully get them to come back, and that someone is a former divine or current divine, depending on everything, a god woken, whatever it is in the scenario of whatever canonical endings and everything we're going with, I feel like this festival would be way more verbose, way more over the top. But you can also see in the background, like this could just be some foliage, but like this, the castle doesn't look in the best state, you know, like maybe this is like part of a ruined time where this is like, hey, this is the best we can offer. So we get this just disgusting. I don't understand how people like dwarves in this universe. There's this guy. Sorry for the cursor. And now we have this. So this could be a reference to so many things, right? And we see this as well as this could possibly be referencing the mask that Fane uses as a reference to the Eternals, the precursor race. And maybe this is some sort of conversation to chaos. Maybe this is a conversation to get the void woken out. And that's what happens here. I think what is kind of going on, and this is totally assumption, is that the people are wanting one ceremony that they think is going to bring the gods back. And I think that the church is in charge of a different, they know the actual intentions of the ceremony, and I think the result is what their actual intentions were, versus the people thought that something more, you know, splendid was going to go down. I'm not clued in enough to all of the iconography of the universe to understand what the like kind of crossed swords here are in reference to the banner on this effigy. That's kind of worth noting, though, I think. Now we see something, and this is now going to play out for the rest of the trailer. We're going to see a reference to nearly every single one of the races right here. It's hard to say who's a human or who is a wizard, right? But one of these I would assume is a wizard. But we're going to see an orc right here, a lizard right here, a human right here, a dwarf right here, an elf right there. That's all of the races minus wizards, which I'm sure maybe one of them is a wizard. Maybe this is a wizard, who knows? Imps are in a really weird, they have a weird relationship with the 7 races. They're often kind of thrown to the side, and they're kind of dismissed. So maybe imps are playing a part of this in some way, shape, or form, but I don't see any direct evidence of them. You also see 2 sets of, or if you kind of divide this picture in half, 2 on the left, you'll see owl and owl. 2 on the right, you'll see a deer, a buck and a buck, wicker head or ornamentation. And you'll see all 4 of these characters down there self-flagellating. This thing just goes up like a tinderbox, dude. And here we go. We see this guy. And they're throwing some torch action. I'll bring that down just a little bit. Now, this is, obviously we have one woman in there, person, and another person over here. And we have these 3 characters all burning at the stake right now. I'm not burning at the stake, sorry. Burning in these wickermen. We see these symbols, which I think are references to the eclipse, because this is an arc, and then this is a circle. And if we go back really quickly to that actual eclipse, arc, and a circle. So I think that there's something in all of this connected between that iconography and what's on those actual symbols there. But this character here, now again, I from my very limited experiences of being burned at the stake, one of the things that is talked about in eyewitness testimonies of people getting burned at stakes is that the heat and all of everything that's coming off of everything burning underneath you, you're going to pass out. Like, you don't burn alive screaming. You usually in this case will pass out. So I think this is something too to kind of not maybe take a huge thing into, but Larian has said that they are trying to take more of a mature approach to a lot of this stuff. They want to treat us as an audience more intelligently, right? And that's assuming that you as the audience would know that. You would know that you're not going to just, if you're burning alive like this, you would actually pass out. So maybe each one of these characters on these wickermen are drugged of some way, shape, or form as part of the ceremony. They knew they would go through it. That's why they woke up in some sort of inebriated state. I'm literally just throwing spitballs here. But again, we see this symbol here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Now this could, of course, too be reference to Brachus Rex and the Blood Rose. So that is another thing that's kind of tying into the source color that people think is around this character's neck. And everyone too is not in any kind of like, oh, look, this is terrible, this is disgusting. But now we're going to get, like I talked about earlier, self-flagellation. We're going to get lust. We're going to get a little bit of gluttony here in a little bit too. Oof, dude. If I could think of a way I wouldn't want to go, burned alive is one of them. That's it. Babos just bursting everywhere. And see, like, this guy has clearly, like, he's like, oh, I don't like that. I'm not sure how good that is. And we take a look at the symbols here. This is a man splayed on the same thing this guy's going through right now. Kind of over here as well. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Oops, sorry. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 gods. And he's clearly like, uh-oh, this is that is some ichor. That is not quite the blood I was. Oh, great. Cool. Someone called them Mario Brothers. You know, like, this, I think, is ultimately what the church wanted, but not exactly what they thought the outcome was going to be. So I think that there's 3 plays here. The people were like, oh, the gods will come back and it'll be beautiful and glorious. And the church was like, the gods are going to come back and it's not going to be fun. It's going to be brutal. But they didn't know it was going to be like this. And then as it happens, I think that they're like, we've made a mistake. Because we get a little bit of even some more evidence of some of the deadly sins, right? Like gluttony and sloth being exemplified here. Pride, I would say, the pride that you see. Way to pause. The pride that you, what a great, like, completely different image. The pride, I think here, the example of pride is, I think, in the divine order. And I'm drawing parallels here as someone who's just kind of throwing darts at a board, but I think that that means something. And this huge explosion, is this void woken? Is this chaos? I think that those are two big questions. I don't think they're allied together because chaos fought against the void woken at one point. So I don't think that they're in any way combined. But we get a bit of an Easter egg here. That's the Larian Studios logo, right? Well, here is the old Larian Studios logo. And this is what I was talking about with the Wickerman, right? Boop, boop, a little bit further back. Here we go. We get, I think this is the Divinity Original Sin logo. And this is the newest logo. But prior to that, we have their oldest logo. Actually, I think I went a little too far back, which is like 2000. So I think this is a little bit of a reference to a lot of things, right? Like, hey, this is the old, this is then the older, I'm sorry, this is the old, the new, and the newest. The progression point of this logo. Because when you're going to see this logo is right here. This is a trailer for the Mage, the Knight, and the Lady in 2000. This is an older precursor game that was supposed to have come out prior to Divine Divinity. And look at that, same damn logo, right? And the premise of this is, it's kind of, it feels a lot like an Ultima game. Over 10,000 screens. Over 80 different characters. Remember when this was like cutting edge trailerage? I do, and I feel old. 100% speech output. Like, you've got revolutionary multiplayer mode. All these things that are kind of the linchpins of the Divinity series as a whole, but also kind of Larian. That looked too much like if you're an Ultima Online fan, this looks like the opening shot of like the Ultima Online thing where it's talking about, I think it's like Maddox, or not Maddox, the Sorcerer and his little like frosty globe. But these three, maybe this is connected somehow to the lore. I don't know. But I thought it was a pretty interesting thing to bring up and show that you've got that quick little glimpse of this logo, right? And you've got these characters here, these Wickerman effigies that share some sort of correlation here with one of them clearly being female. So, or at least having a female in it. So I found that to be a really kind of cool Easter egg to kind of pull out. That logo, that connection to LMK. And then we get that one dwarf character that we've been seeing, right? with that same crown and collar, if you want to call it that, around this character, which clearly didn't have that before. And as it pans back, we get this, which they've dubbed a Hellstone. Why is this one important? It has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 arms, versus we had 7 before. 7 referencing the 7 gods and the 7 races. The 8th race, a reference to, could it be Chaos? Could it be the Eternals? Could it be Voidwoken? And I think that that is, again, a big link to all of this. And this also looks like it is the one, this is built off of the rightmost Wickerman, because it had almost the exact same symbolage of this. So there's a lot going on here. And again, we'll get this really cool imagery of Divinity. I think this gives us a ton to dive into, and there's a ton of little cool Easter eggs here. But what does Larian think? Well, how have they positioned this, and what have they said from the press? So let's sum up a lot of what I've just talked about and talk about what they've officially said together, so we don't kind of blur those lines. So I'm just going to let this trailer kind of play a couple times. So we know that this is going to be a CRPG, right? This is going to be just like Baldur's Gate, Divinity Original Sin 1 and 2. But this is Fen unshackled, right? Let me turn this down a little bit. This is a chance for him to flex all of this combined, like 29, 30 some odd years of being in the industry, right? This allows him to really come to the fore and create a game that is what he probably originally intended to make so many years ago. Now, what I want to really kind of bring to light here as well is this is a brand new engine. Divinity Original Sin 1 is its own engine. 2 is an improvement upon that engine. Baldur's Gate 3 is a further improvement upon that engine. So what they probably did was take a lot of the things that they wanted in this game and test them with Baldur's Gate 3. I don't think that they said like, hey, let's use Baldur's Gate 3 as a testing dummy. I think that as they really fleshed the system out and learned more and more and more, they decided, well, we can probably do some crazy stuff with this. And now that Hasbro and Wizards of the Coast is not breathing down Larian's neck to make things a very specific way for continuity of D&D and what have you, they're able to do whatever they want with all of the combined power and, I mean, honestly, clout and trust that they've purchased with Baldur's Gate 3. And I think that that brings us into a pretty awesome space where they've said too that this is supposed to be a darker, grittier tone, not even just for the Divinity series, but in general. They want to hit subjects that are a little bit that maybe some other studios would shy away from. And I think that they've already shown us that they can do that amazingly, right? Like you take a look at the Dark Urge playthrough, and if you've not played Dark Urge in Baldur's Gate 3, stop your 19th playthrough, make your 20th a Dark Urge one, because it's so unique, and they tackle things not just by being a murder hobo who kills everything, but they tackle the nuance of evil, or they tackle the nuance of tyranny, and how oftentimes indifference is what really gives way to those things, not necessarily killing tons of things. And I think that that is kind of the scope that we're getting here, that this isn't just a nuance of order versus chaos, which has been kind of a big thing for the Divinity series as a whole, but there's a nuance to all of the way we're going to be approaching Divinity. And I'm really excited to see what that means. They've also said it's a new rule set. So I don't know if that new rule set means they're going to play off of the Divinity Original Sin rule set, or if they are truly making an absolute brand new one, which, if I'm being totally honest with you, I think that they do. The Divinity Original Sin rule set, kind of like playing Pillars of Eternity, is weird because it feels like D&D, but it's not. If I'm using Pillars of Eternity as an example here, strength in that game or constitution in that game is way different than it is in our common understanding of those things from D&D. And I think that's important. So I think that now they've built such a good amount of rapport, they've got some good chops off of Baldur's Gate 3, we can get a Divinity game that is what Sven intended. It's almost like you want to look at it from like a Star Wars standpoint. And this has probably been a story that's changed so many times in the last 30 some odd years. But George Lucas always said like, hey, I always wanted to start with 1, 2, and 3, the prequels, but I didn't have the resources and we didn't have the technology to give them justice. So we did 4, 5, and 6, where it's like it's a rebellion against an empire and a smaller conflict versus, hey, it's two massive, it's a big civil war that we're dealing with. So now that we've got the resources, we can do the prequels. This is, I think, the same thing. Now that Larian has the resources, they can truly do the Divinity that they've always wanted to do. So it'll be really exciting to see what all this means. A lot of this is assumption. A lot of this is me I'm inferring based off of the lore that I know. And I'm not the most practiced practitioner of the lore of Divinity. And there are definitely lore masters out there. So if you know something that you want to like, hey, you know what? This is probably more what that is because of this reference or whatever it is, go ahead and let it be known in the comment section below. I'm not saying this stuff is creed. I'm saying this stuff based off of my just understanding of things so far. But I think what this ultimately comes down to is that the gods are definitely up to something, or the return of the gods is here, or there's a new power stirs, tells me that an 8th god, race, whatever, is now coming to the fore and is letting itself be known in a pretty brutal way. So Larian's approach to wanting to treat us like an intellectual fandom, I think, is a really important thing. My brother works in the film industry, and he's told me many times how like sometimes the film industry won't let certain certain movies be greenlit because they're like, no, we have to like do certain things like this. We have to dumb these things down because they assume the audience is stupid, which is not needed because the audience isn't. So Larian's taking that approach of trying to make for an intellectual, or at least a game that respects our intelligence out the gate, which I'm very excited to see how that plays itself out. So go ahead and let me know in the comment section below. Are there things that you noticed about this, or things that you're excited about this, or whatever it is? Just let it be known. I'm hoping that we get early access for this just to kind of see what they've got planned. Like I bought Baldur's Gate 3 when it came out on early access, and then I pretty much never touched it until it actually launched. Happy to support the company that did this, right? Because Larian's badasses. But I'm also just kind of curious to see how this game is going to feel. Is it, how gritty is it going to be versus the very colorful, whimsical, whimsical, I'll stick with whimsical for Divinity Original Sin 1 and 2, because there is humor to those games, right? But is this going to abandon humor for just a much darker tone? So it's very curious to see what that's going to be like. But as always, guys, thank you so much for watching here today. Have a good one and take care.